So I'm Jennifer Bajorek, and I'm an assistant professor of comparative literature here at Hampshire.
And I'm Kohler. I'm professor of architectural and art history. It depends on what you mean by vision, right? The vision of slow teaching definitely has stayed the same, where we are really concentrating on one image at a time in a really detailed way and building the context and the research context outside of the time that we spend in class. During that hour and 20 minutes, we have it packed with all kinds of small group work, large group work, pairs, us lecturing.
Free writing.
Right. So yes, really engaging with that one image intensely.
So we chose images that allow us to raise different kinds of questions, not only about the history of photography as a technology or a medium, but also in relation to art markets or the recirculation of images. So it's different histories, different moments in the history of the technology and of the medium, but also the ways in which photography has kind of infiltrated different fields. Yeah.
We liked Scalar because it seemed like it was a very good research site, almost like it was a smart database. Once we decided to go to blended, it was, if we're going to focus on one image in class and we're going to move the critical and the historical context that normally we would be presenting on or lecturing on in class off to the digital site and to make that more interactive for students so that they were engaging not just passively but in a very interactive way with the material.
So the first thing students see when they go to the module is the core photograph, and it's featured above a kind of table of contents, but if they click on it, they can get the photograph kind of in a pure field at the original size, and they can enlarge it and so on as well. And that's the photograph we ask them and the version we ask them to engage with when they first have their first exposure and do their free writing.
What the visual material look like is incredibly important to us. I always say it's like reading every other line of a poem if you have a terrible image, right?
Degraded copy.
Degraded, yeah.
And then we ask them to go away after we talk about the photograph and begin to have a conversation based on that initial exposure and what it elicits. And then we ask them to do one required critical reading that we tend to refer to between ourselves, not always with the students, as the model methodology text. So it's a critical reading that kind of engages with a very particular methodology or that raises methodological questions in a particular way.
So every week we ask them to put something on this shared course timeline
that runs through the entire duration of the course, right? That's the idea.
So you can be a historical event, it can be a reference to anything that helps to build a context for the class. So that's why we like Scalar, is it was a smart looking, very well set up site.
We can think of many ways. I think you put it this way earlier, Karen, that it gave them a lot of responsibility outside of class. The way we use the blended approach in terms of delivery of core aspects of the curriculum really required them to take responsibility for working their way through the different levels of material. And that seemed to increase their engagement. I also think the actual practice of the slow teaching and looking at the images together created this incredibly dynamic, deep sense of engagement on the part, as Karen said, of like all of our students in the class.
Every time we introduce a new photograph, we begin with 20 minutes of free writing. And they spend 20 minutes just writing about what they see, and we're asking them to mark at what time they saw it like 10 minutes in, 15 minutes in. I noticed there was this shadow over there or something like that. And then we asked them to share a little bit about what they've seen. So the really nice thing about that is that we have empowered them to start off with the content of how we're going to address that. And sometimes there will be an issue or a theme or a particular mode of looking that appears in their initial analysis that will be a thread that will carry through. And so I think that has encouraged them then, because they take ownership of the image right from the start to go off and actually do the contextual work that is set up to be done in the blended environment. You're going to have a lot of upfront work. There's no doubt about it. We were fortunate enough that the Teagle Foundation grant is generous enough. I don't think we could have done it without that.
There's no way we could have done it.
Absolutely, we could not have done that amount of work. You know, any class is rough the first time, better the second, easy the third, right? So, and I think blended really makes those qualities exponential.
I think we did come up with a model where there are elements that we know and love in our teaching in the past that are still very much front and center, and then there was some experimentation with the technology, and we had a pretty nice mix where we knew there were some things that, you know, were going to be foolproof and that were always going to work and that we can do sort of with our eyes closed, that were kind of the backbone of the course, and then there was a lot of experimentation you know, with the platform as a space to kind of like try to present that material and do some of that teaching and do some of that, you know, elicit some of that thinking from the students in new ways. You know, that there was still some tried and true material, and that we tried to use the experiments to kind of enhance what it is that we already love about what we do and the way we teach, right? So I would encourage people not only to not be afraid, but also to remember that it can enhance what they already know how to do, rather than like push them to do something that's completely new and scary, right? So I think what we've accomplished, you know, is for sure having created a course that was doing something that no other course at Hampshire or that either of us was teaching individually.
I would say there's not a day that I'm not excited to come to this class.
I would agree with that.
Which is huge, right? Yeah.